If you're curious about the custom artwork process, here's the story of how I turned a client's rough idea, this, into this, a 3-panel triptych format. Recently, a new client reached out. She wanted a custom artwork of a particular area of the park here in Uptown Manhattan. She didn't have a concrete idea of what she wanted, just a rough idea that she wanted to capture this special place in our neighborhood. The idea would require some refining, but I actually look forward to it because I hadn't yet painted that particular part of the park in our neighborhood. From my point of view, it's always refreshing to be able to work on something that's new to me. After a phone call and some brainstorming and a great idea that she proposed, we landed on a 3-panel triptych format, and she ended up loving the end result. Stay with me to see how you can start with a client's idea, set expectations so that everyone's on the same page, and execute on the custom artwork to end up with something that they love. I keep my clients informed along the way as much as possible. That's because there are certain key decision points, and if you can nail those, then you can minimize any surprises along the way and set yourself up for success. The client already knows my style, and that's why they approached me for this custom artwork. I take comfort in that because it narrows down the variables needed to ensure a successful artwork. Still, that leaves a few objective factors that still need to be hammered out. For example, the size and dimension, because that determines the pricing, and then the actual orientation of the artwork, such as portrait or landscape. That influences what goes into the composition. Every commission I take on requires a 50% deposit up front. That enables me to reserve a month for the project. I typically will dedicate 1 month to a project unless I think it's going to take longer, and then I will discuss that at the beginning. Since I have a queue of custom artwork projects, I have a schedule that I have to stick to, and so that means my projects are usually scheduled out several months in advance. That gives us time to further refine the various details like the composition and also gather more reference photos if needed. For this project, about a week before the project dates were to start, I reached back out to my client to further refine the idea and make the vision concrete. After I reached out, my client sent me some more photos. I had a feeling I knew what she was going for, so I actually sent her a couple of other photos that I had taken recently. They showed basically the same tree, and it's this tree that her family has called the grandma tree, and everyone around here in this neighborhood knows that tree. She responded positively, and then we ended up settling on this perspective. Like I said, I was excited to paint this scene because I hadn't actually done it, although I had been meaning to over the years. I love this stretch of the park. It's called the Stan Michaels Promenade, and this particular composition would make good use of the 11 by 14 size paper. But we still needed to figure out the overall tone, the palette, and the focus of the painting. And then she came up with a big idea that really got the juices flowing. She suggested that we show the passage of time. It brought to mind the seasons, and I knew this could be a powerful image. We could show parts of the same scene in different seasons, like winter and spring and fall. And then the format of a triptych came to my mind. We could divide up the scene into 3 panels, and each panel could show a different season taking place in the same scene. And they would just be broken up by some sort of dividing line. I gravitated towards this idea because I knew it would be an amazing opportunity to show some of the loveliest aspects of this park. People come from all over the city just to see the flowers in this section called Heather Garden, and it's a must-see location, especially if you're going to visit the Met Cloisters Museum, which is also in Fort Tryon Park. So I took the photos and I mocked up some options for my client, and I played with the sequence of the seasons, and we ultimately ended up with this sequence of winter, spring, and fall from left to right. And she loved the idea, and now I was ready for the pencil sketch. The pencil sketch included 2 lines to divide the 3 panels. I decided not to use tape for those lines, but rather I would just paint carefully up to those edges. I knew some paint might actually spill over into those lines, but it might actually look more natural, perhaps rustic in the end. I showed this to my client and she was good with it, and now it was time to move on with the painting phase. When I paint snow, I usually like to use the white of the paper to convey the character of the snow. For this snowy panel, I decided to use liquid mask because of all the intersecting passages of snow. If I just tried to manually use my brush and avoid areas that had snow on them, I probably would forget where I was and I would easily make mistakes and paint over areas that should be snow covered. So I masked the sky-facing parts of the branches, the trunks, and painted details around those areas. When I remove the mask later on, it will clearly show patches of snow cover. Painting a snowy scene also means I can paint a little bit less, and it requires some restraint actually to not fill in too much detail. Here, less is more because of the white of the paper that I'm trying to preserve to stand in for the snow. One of the tricks here to making an effective layer of snow is to make sure to add some tone, some color to the areas just beyond the edge of the liquid mask. This way, when I remove the liquid mask, it'll reveal an empty area. Otherwise, it would just be white space up against white space, and then there would have been no point in actually using the mask. And by the way, starting with the left panel, the winter scene, actually made practical sense because this way, because I'm right-handed, when I'm painting, I'm not going to accidentally put my arm on wet areas and ruin those sections. But it also felt comfortable and logical because I was moving from a cold winter scene through warmer colors of the spring and then to the warmest, most dramatic colors of the fall. And that would actually be a joy to go through that process. So it looks like a progression and it also feels like a progression as an artist when I'm painting it. Moving on to the spring panel, we have more colors and shadow that's from a sun that's pretty high in the sky. And here, because the branches are extending from the left side, from the tree into the rest of the composition, we have to make sure to capture some of those branches. But because there's foliage now, we don't have to show all of the lengths of those branches. We can just show glimpses by putting some darks representing the branch, intermittent darks where the foliage is. And basically, we don't have to have completely continuous lines to show the branches, just show hints of them peeking through the leaves. I'm also consciously adding some browns here to warm up the branches as they're in sunlight, and I wanted to bring out a bit more warmth than we had in the winter scene. To actually capture this scene, I used a bunch of my own reference photos that I've taken over the years. I also used photos from online to really try and capture sort of the shapes and the overall impression of the heather garden, which is here in this scene. I wasn't going for literal accuracy here, but I wanted to at least capture the general sense because it's such a familiar spot for my client and for many of us who live in this part of Manhattan. And I wanted to convey the sense, the feeling of that environment without being too literal. While I waited for this panel to dry, I went back to panel 1 and darkened some of the background areas and also added some detail and color to the areas just above the liquid mask so that when we do remove it later, there'll be some tonal contrast there that conveys a sense of a snowy patch. And then I took the opportunity to darken some areas of the tree That's really to heighten the contrast. Eventually, when I remove the liquid mask, that added contrast will enhance that sensation of snow. And then while I was at it, I went back to panel 2 and I continued darkening areas of the branches, really to finish off the range of values there. Turning to the fall panel, it was great to be able to start using warmer colors like reds and oranges. I started this panel by doing a wash for the sky. While I waited for that to dry, I revisited the other panels to touch them up. Because watercolor always dries a lighter, there's always areas that you could potentially darken. So going from left to right, we began with a monochrome winter scene, and then in the spring we had warmer, livelier colors, and then we end with the most dramatic scene in the fall panel. This panel shows that special time of year here in the Northeast, just before the leaves are starting to fall. People take road trips, they're called leaf peepers. They take leaf peeping trips upstate and to other parts of the Northeast just to catch these beautiful washes of color that we start seeing everywhere in the hills and the mountains here. The branches from the main tree all end in this panel, and so there are lots of clusters of leaves and foliage here. So it actually covers up a lot of the background. We do catch a glimpse of the George Washington Bridge in the background, along with the cliffs of the Palisades just beyond. But this panel is going to be full of orange and reds. We didn't have any of our own reference photos for this, so I pieced together various scenes of Fort Tryon Park in the fall from images that I found online, and I basically used those to capture some of the fall colors here. For the branches and twigs, because of the fall foliage, we barely even see them, so I didn't really have to paint very much of the structure of the trees, but basically I could just scrape in glimpses of the branches and twigs, just enough to convey the body and the skeleton underneath. With most of the painting finished, it was time to remove the liquid mask. Because I didn't really use that much of it in any one place, it was relatively easy for me to just remove it all by rubbing my fingers. You can see the white space that's uncovered. It ends up revealing these patches of snow. I might usually touch up these areas a bit, but actually in this painting I didn't feel like it was necessary. The only thing left to touch this up was basically to erase the dark pencil lines throughout the painting, including in the dividing lines and on the border. If you enjoyed this, check out this other commissioned piece where I painted a father-daughter portrait. I'm Francis Shui. I'm a working artist based here in New York City. Like, share, and subscribe to see more about my artwork. You can also visit my shop, art-francis.com, to see more of my original artwork and also to learn how to commission me for custom artwork. Until the next time, go and paint.